So in this video, we're gonna learn how to fix the request 404 error that we see happening down here when we search the country does not exist. And so the problem here is that during the fact there was a 404 error, which is because our API couldn't find any country with this name. But still, even though there was obviously a big problem with this request, the fetch function still did not reject. In this case, the promise should actually be rejected right away. But again, it just doesn't. And so we still have to do it manually. And so to see what happens here, let's go back to this first then handler, which gets access to the response immediately. So without even the data, so here I'm adding back a block, and let's take a look at the response here. And also since we added back the block, we now need to return this explicitly. So okay, for now, we'll just take a look at the response object here. And so right here, you can see that OK property is set to false. And so the reason for that is, of course, the data code is 404. And now when the request goes where, and so that's what's going to happen when we click here. So then if we take a look at the response, here, OK is true. It's because the data is 200. And so 200 is literally stands for OK. So we can now use the fact that this response has the OK property set to false to basically reject the promise ourselves manually. So we can do that by creating a new error. So we can say if there is no response.ok, or in other words, if response.ok is false, then we write throw new error, and here we can define an error message. So let's write very logical message here, which is country not found. This is a real error message that we want to see here, and of course not this one here with we cannot read property. And here we can then also take the data code and display it as well. So this 404 in this case, so this is something that we never did before. So let's analyze what happens here. So we create a new error by using again this constructor function basically, and then we pass it as a message, which is gonna be the error message. Then we use the throw keyword here, which will immediately terminate the current function. So just like a return does it, now the effect of creating and throwing an error any of these then method is that the promise will immediately reject. So basically the promise returned by this then handler here will be a rejected promise, and that rejection will then propagate all the way down to the catch handler, which we already have set up here. And so now, so if we try to reload this, so now this error message that we created here, so that is country not found 404. So exactly this. This is exactly the rejection that we created here by creating this new error. So again, any error that happens in any of the callback function here, so at any then handler, we immediately terminate that then handler and propagate down to the catch method here. And then here, we handle that error. And so therefore, that's why we can then see the error here displayed. So that error.message is exactly that message that we pass into the error here. And in fact, the same is true for any other error. So before we had this, so the error that we saw was this one here, and that's because somewhere in the render country function we tried to read the flag from the data that we received, but the data that we received did not contain this flag, and so therefore it's created this error, and then that error caused the rejection of the promise, which was then handed down one more time here. So again, any error will cause any promise to reject, but here we simply created our own error to basically reject the promise on purpose. So we can then handle that error down here in the chain. So in this catch method. But now you might be wondering why we should even bother handle all these errors. Isn't that just a bunch of work and a waste of time? First, handling this error is the only way in which we can actually display an error message like this on the screen for the user. But even more important, it's just a really bad practice to leave these rejected promises hanging around without handling them. So all we use the catch. If necessary, you can also use finally. And now again, what if there is no error here in this promise? So if we got no problem in this one here, but then we get a problem in the second fetch, let's say that we don't do this. So we have a reasonable country which is Spain when we click on the button. But then here, let's say the neighbor is not this one, but this country code, which is I'm sure does not exist. And so now there's gonna be a rejection in this promise. So we get another error here. In this case, it's a 400 error, which means something else. But in any case, the error is not handled. So we now need to go ahead and copy this code here. Also enter this then handler. So let's actually do that. Even though we know it's a bad practice and we need to fix this later. And so now we get the error message that we want. So again, country not found, and this time with the code 400. But now of course we have all this duplicate code here, but we shouldn't have this here. And in fact, all of this is a kind of repetitive. It's the same as this one. And so now it's a good time to actually create ourselves a really nice helper function. And this helper function will wrap up the fetch, the error handling, and also the conversions to JSON. Because in my opinion, it's a really big cumbersome to having all of these steps all the time. So having the fetch and the having to convert that response to JSON, only then be able to handle it. Instead, we will basically encapsulate all of this here into one nice function. So let's do that. And I'm gonna call it getJSON. So basically because it gets data and it immediately converts to JSON. Now what do we need here as a parameters? For sure we need the URL, and so for now that's okay here. So what we want here is a fetch and then the URL that we pass into the function. And then on that we want to call the them method, and then basically with all of this. So let's grab them from here and paste it here. Now, in order to actually make this function really generic, we do not want to hardcode the error message, but instead we want to pass the message in. So let's say error message, and we can set a default value here. So let's say something went wrong, which is very generic. So here inside of this, we want the error message that we passed in, and along with response.status. And so now all we need to do is to return all of this. So like this getJSON function will return a promise, and so this is just like any other promise that we can call here in our chain and basically replace all of this. So getJSON and then the URL and the error message is the country not found, and not the same down here. Instead of fetch we can get getJSON, and again the error message is country not found, and then we don't need this here anymore. So let's check here. And indeed we get again country not found with the code 400 because of this one. So that's working great.